Well, since the last video, I've gone ahead and added a few things here. I've added a ceiling, and I have added a texture to it. I've took the UV map into Photoshop and layered a couple of different textures on top of each other to kind of get this dirty old ceiling kind of a look. I've also added a seamless texture to the floor and went ahead and added some texture to the doors. Now the doors I went ahead and did like I did the walls here. In other words, I took two of these, a door and a window frame, combined them together, arranged the UV map so the UV islands were all on the same UV map, and then I went ahead and textured that one UV map to provide textures for both the window frames and the door jamb. So if we come over here to the UV editing screen layout, and I will frame these up with the period key here. If I tab into edit mode, say for the door frame, you can see that here is the UV map for that. And if I tab into the UV map for a window frame, you can see that that's where the UV islands are. So they've been arranged once again into all one UV map, so that now, even though these are different objects in the scene and in Unity, they still are only pulling from one UV map, one texture map. So if we come over here to Unity and I select one of these guys here, I'll zoom into it with the F key. And so you can see the window frame texture here. There it is here, and go ahead and expand that. So you can see that we've got both the window frame and the door jamb UV maps all being represented on one texture map. Now I've also worked on the kitchen walls over here, this center wall and the walls here in the kitchen. There will be kitchen counters and other things going on here along the walls, so we won't see a whole lot of the walls over here. But I went ahead and did the same thing yet again for these walls and combined the UV islands all onto one UV map to make the texturing a little more efficient. All right, so all of these processes, all of these techniques are things that we've already gone over in previous videos. So I didn't do anything new here per se. Now I've still got my HDR image in here for the reflections. You can see in there the reflections of that HDR image. But one thing I need to do here is turn off anti-aliasing. And when using an HDR image currently in Unity, you do need to turn off the anti-aliasing and then re-add it as an effect on the camera. So let's just take a look at that real quick. I'll come over here to the Edit menu and come over to Project Settings and Quality. And over here under anti-aliasing, I'm going to go ahead and turn this off to disabled. Now when I run the game, I'm not sure that you'll be able to see this, but now we have no anti-aliasing. And if you look real close along the edges of the objects, you can see a kind of jaggedness along the edge. I can see it here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but it's certainly visible when you play the game. So we don't want that. So what we can do is add an anti-aliasing effect on the camera itself. But what we need to do is import those effects into the standard assets folder here. So to do that, I'm going to right click in the assets folder and choose import package. And you can't really see it here. Let me come up, let me bring this up a little higher. I'm going to right click here and choose import package. And here you can see effects. I'll click that. It's going to think a while, and you can see up here under image effects, you've got anti-aliasing here. So this is what we want. I'll go ahead and click import. And now we should have within our standard assets, we should have this effects folder. And in here under image effects, we should have scripts, and here's our anti-aliasing script right here. So now if we come up to player and select that main camera, we can click and drag that right over here into the inspector. Now there isn't a whole lot we need to do with this. It should be okay the way it is currently, so I'll just hit play and let's take a look at it. And now if we go into these edges, they're a little cleaner. I don't know if you can see that or not, but these edges along the coffee table are quite a bit cleaner than they were. The next thing I want to do is get the lighting in the room a little bit better, a little bit more like we want in the final scene. Currently we've got this kind of wash of ambient light in the scene. We're not able to distinguish pools of light and dark in the scene. It's just kind of a wash. So to change that, I'm going to come over here to the lighting tab right up here and click on that. And for the ambient intensity, it's currently at 1. It's getting its ambient intensity from the skybox, from that HDR image here. So I want to just bring that down a bit. Make it a little bit darker in the room. Maybe bring that down to say, let's put it at 0.2. Now we can also bring down the reflection intensity just a little bit, and that will bring down the level of the scene as well. But I want that, at least some of that reflection in there, so maybe I'll take that down to like 0.8. And now we can see that we've got a little bit more ability to have these pools of light and dark. So for the point light here now, I could go back to the inspector and maybe increase the intensity just a little bit, like that. Right? So we've got a little bit more of a differentiation between light and dark. Maybe even on this table lamp shade, I could increase the emission just a bit. If I click and drag here, I can maybe increase the emission just a bit so it looks a little bit more like there's light coming out of that. In addition, what I could do is set up a couple of spotlights to point up and down out of the lampshade to give it the impression that the light is on and illuminating the area around the lamp. So let's try that. I will come over here to the hierarchy, right click, and I'll choose light and spotlight. Get this in place. I want to get this in place right inside that lamp there. Let me switch from shaded to wireframe. And over here, I'll tumble and select that y-axis right there and switch from perspective to orthographic. And now I can move that light, the center of that light, right in the center of the lamp, right there. All right. I'll switch back from orthographic to perspective, and I'll switch back to shaded. Now let's take a look at that. Okay, so I'll move this up into here, and I'll expand the circle out a bit with this spot angle. I can click and drag that out some, like that, let's say. And I can also turn on shadows. I'll turn on the hard shadows there, so you can kind of get a sense of how it's bleeding out there. I kind of like this with that more soft edge there coming out, and I like those shadows coming off of there. That's nice. And let's see what else we could do. Let's go ahead and duplicate this and turn it upward. This probably doesn't need to be quite so bright though. Before I do that, let me take this down a bit, like that. And let's also change the color some. This is an incandescent interior bulb, so it's going to be more orangey. So I'll maybe change the color just a little bit. A little bit of color can go a long way, so you don't need to like crank it way over here. That looks too much. So just a little bit of color on a light goes a long way. So there we go. Let's do that. All right, so now I'm going to duplicate this. I'll select it over here and press Control or Command D. And now I want to flip it over. I'll hit the E key to go to rotate, and I'll click and drag around that x-axis, and I'll go ahead and put it -90. There we go. That turns it up. And let's see if we can get this in place. Maybe move it down a bit. It's a little bit too much. How about like that? Let me pull it up some and then pull the angle. Make it a little bit bigger. spot angle right here and out a bit like that. Bring it down some like that. So we get kind of this sense that that's a light source in the room. So let me select this one. I want to increase the spot angle just a little bit more here. And then I want to bring it down some. There we go. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so now let's say this one is, what do we want to call this? We want to call this lamp down, and the other one is lamp up. How about that? Lamp up. There we go. And this light here is going to be that bare bulb. Once we model that and hang this in the scene, it'll be a bare bulb light. So I'll just call that bare bulb light. There we go. I'll drag this down here. And let's begin grouping these objects together now, just to clean up the hierarchy a bit. Now, down here in the Assets folder, we can right-click and create a new folder. But up here in the hierarchy, there is no folder option. Here in the hierarchy, what we need to do is create an empty. And an empty is just a location without any geometry. It's just an empty object. So I'm going to create an empty, and it automatically puts it over here in the center of my viewport. But what I want it to be is in the center of the scene. So I'm just going to type 0, 0, 0 for the X, Y, and Z over here in the position. And I'll change the name of this to lights. There we go. Now I can take these lights in the scene and drag them into that empty game object. And what that does is it pretty much creates a type of folder, right, that we can use to organize our scene. Up here I've got table lamp, I've got couch, I've got player, in table. All of these here, I could create a group called furniture. Why don't I do that? I'll create an empty. I'll put it in the center of the grid, 0, 0, 0. I'll call this furniture. And I'll drag the couch, coffee table, end table, table lamp into that group there. There we go. So now we have a group for our furniture. We've also got a group here with walls. I can also put that floor in that group as well. I just call it walls, ceiling, floor, I guess. I can do that. Walls, ceiling, floor. There we go. That cleans that up a bit. So now we've got the hierarchy cleaned up. We have a pretty good clean assets folder down here. That's good too. One thing I don't like is these big gizmos in my viewport, the camera and the lights. I want to see them sometimes, but not all the time. So I can come up here to the gizmos, and for the 3D icons, you can turn these off and it will make them small, or you can drag the slider all the way down and it will just take them all the way out of the scene. So now you can have a scene without all that clutter. Now I do think it may be a little bit too dark. I'm going to bring the ambient intensity back up just a little bit so we can see what's going on in the room here as we work. I'll put that at 0.75 is what I'll do. There we go. All right, so we've gone a long way to organizing our scene and setting up some of the lighting so we can see how things are going to look as we bring them in. Another thing we can do is add a color correction effect on our camera. See how that helps. Let's come over here back to the camera, and I'll go into the standard assets, effects, image effects, and scripts. And let's come over here to one of these color corrections. Let me drag this slider right here so we can see the full names. We've got curves, lookup, and ramp. Let's try curves. I'm just going to select this camera, come over here to the inspector. So let me drag in this color correction curves here. I'm just going to click and drag right over here into the inspector. And it doesn't look like a whole lot has happened here, but if we hit the play button, look at the difference now. It really has a lot more saturation to it. Really brings it alive, I think. Now, this may be too much. We can always adjust this a bit, but as we begin setting up our materials and everything, I think this is going to help us get a sense of how it's going to look. So I'll hit the play button again to turn that off, and we can take the saturation up and down here in the color correction component. Currently it's at 1. So I think that's going to help us as we set up our scene as well to kind of begin to get a sense of what the final look is going to be.